Secrets of the C-Suite, the podcast, is for anyone interested in leadership and the wins, losses, and lessons of being an executive. We are two women who have successfully navigated C-Suite roles and are sharing our experiences. We will be bringing on guests to tell their stories and want to spark honest conversation and discussion, which may include swearing and lots of laughs. Join us on this adventure.
Welcome back to another episode of Secrets of the C-Suite, the podcast, where we explore the experiences, lessons, and multidimensional lives of senior leaders and executives. I'm Susan Sutherland, and I'm joined by my comrade and collaborator, Juliette Clothier. Our guest today is someone both Juliette and I have worked with. Juliette as a direct report and thought partner, and I as a coach and consultant to their organization. We're both looking forward to our conversation with Mark Cederborg, who I'll be introducing in just a minute.
We will be featuring some creative products on Secrets of the C-Suite, and the first of these is Hawk on Call. This is a cool innovation by a couple of entrepreneurs that we're excited to share. They had a problem with mice in their home and didn't want to use traps or poison to exterminate. They did some research and found that because hawks are predators to rodents, the sound of a hawk's call can keep mice and other pests at bay. Out of that discovery came a fantastic product called Hawk on Call. Whether in a house, apartment, or office, the Hawk on Call keeps your space rodent-free. Simply download the Hawk on Call 8-hour or 4-hour sound loop to play on your cell phone, laptop, or Bluetooth speaker. Go to hawkoncall.com to read more about it and to download.
Juliette, how are you today?
I'm great, Susan. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. It's a Monday. Oh,
it is.
Maybe we'll have to edit out the Monday part.
I don't think so. I think we should say it's Monday.
All right. So in thinking about today's episode, I thought I would loop back to a comment I made on the fly in one of our recent recordings. We were talking about executives who have what is commonly known as imposter syndrome.
Right.
Where the sense of like, I don't belong in my job. They're going to find out I don't know what I'm doing. And I call that sort of a feeling of not enoughness. And I mentioned that it can be a very powerful exercise to create an evidence bank. And you and I discussed after that recording that it might be useful to explain what an evidence bank is. So I'm going to take a stab at that and invite you, Juliette, to add anything to it. An evidence bank is a fancy word for basically a written list of your accomplishments and achievements, moments of professional, interpersonal, or leadership glory that you can literally draw from, like you're taking money out of a bank when that imposter voice comes calling. We tend to dismiss our minds when it tries to reassure us that no, in fact, we do know what we're doing, but if it's just in our mind, we can ignore that. But when you have a written list, even if you wrote it, when you have a written list, you can review it again and again, and it's incontrovertible evidence. Your mind recognizes the truth of it. So it's best compiled when you're clear-eyed and feeling optimistic, but it should be a rather detailed list of actions and outcomes. So that's the concept of an evidence bank, and I'm always amazed at how powerful that is.
So what would you give us a couple of examples for? Because you have the actions and whatever.
Actions and outcomes. Okay,
yeah, so what would you say?
I'll give you an example from when I was in the C-suite and I had a big meeting with the leadership team, and I would go to that place of, I'm not going to say it right, or I know how these people are going to react and object. And then what I would do is I would stop and I would think through the times I had gone and given a presentation and I had been articulate and I had been persuasive and I handled objections really well with the audience in mind. So I would make a note of, I've done this before, and I've done this before with an outcome that was the one I wanted or close to the one I wanted. So that's the kind of example of detail. Like I prepared, I was thinking on my feet. I was able to, in the moment, respond and be articulate. I remembered that I was a leader. So that's just my example. I don't know, Julia.
Yeah, I think we were going back. I think this all came out of that conversation I had, that coaching conversation I had with the person who was hesitant to have VP on their resume because they didn't feel like they had earned that title, that it was given to them rather than earned. And I think that's a really good example of how do you remember how do you help yourself remember those moments. And so in real time, documenting those things, and after you leave a meeting that you were a little anxious about or nervous about, writing that stuff down, because you can't always remember it when you're trying to remember it. But
and it
if you think
stick.
about right. But you can think about the feeling too. And I think adding the feeling of confidence and competence to the evidence bank is really helpful. So
I think we all need to be like Simone Biles and stick the landing.
That's right.
All right. I think it's probably time to invite our guests to join us in on this conversation. What do you say, Juliet?
Let's bring them in.
Do it. So I'm very pleased to introduce Mark Cederborg, who's an expert in the construction of ecological restoration projects with an impressive 30-year career in the sector. Most recently, Mark has served as the CEO of a mid-sized construction company specializing in ecological restoration construction. Mark's career has been a remarkable journey, from starting as a laborer in the construction industry to becoming a CEO. His extensive hands-on experience ranges from working alongside equipment operators to managing large-scale restoration projects. As he transitioned into executive leadership, Mark mastered the complexities of public works administration, financial requirements, contract and labor regulations, project budgeting, and competitive bidding. Doesn't that all sound like fun? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be cynical. It's a lot, though. Mark is not only a seasoned leader, but also a strong advocate for inclusive and collaborative processes in ecological projects. He co-founded and advises the Ecological Workforce Initiative, dedicated to creating training standards and career opportunities in ecological trade work. We have so much to dive into with Mark, so let's do that. Mark, welcome.
Thank you. I really appreciate being here and the opportunity to talk about my experience. And I think what's one thing, as you've read through my introduction, one of the things that stood out to me was there was no master's degree in business. There was no formal training in there. And I think that that sort of, I don't know if it's unique, but it really actually, it goes back to the intro, or to your discussion before I came on that I listened to about just this, the fact that I had to continually reassure myself to have the confidence to make the decisions based on experience versus that formal education. So
yeah, you're a prime example of someone who has continued to learn and sharpen your skills as you've gone. We're very excited to have you on, Mark.
Thank you.
I want to just say,
Juliet.
I'm just going to jump in here for a second. I do want to say that I think that one of the things that I was most impressed with in working with Mark was his ability to learn new things and just dive in and master it all. So I came in as the CFO, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And what I was most impressed with is that Mark knew everything about accounting, from accounts payable all the way up through financial reporting. So he knew what everybody was doing. And I think that's really impressive for a leader. It's rare.
Yeah. So, Mark, I'm going to start with a real softball question, and not the one that I mentioned before we started recording, which is, can you give us a layperson's understanding about what ecological restoration construction is?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So it's construction of ecological restoration projects, consists of working in environmentally sensitive areas that need repair or uplift. So, but it also, so traditionally people might have heard of it when they think about wetland restoration or stream restoration, tidal marsh, mountain meadows. But more and more, as we start to look at how to adapt to climate change and how to improve our gray infrastructure, so bridges and roads and those kinds of things, they are becoming integrated to ecological work and working with natural systems, because everything we do as we modify the gray infrastructure, we interface with the quote green infrastructure. Yeah. And so as those things have started to merge, projects are growing in size. And so a lot of the ecological restoration work now, people might think about it traditionally as, revegetation or something like that. But a lot of it now involves pretty large scale civil infrastructure.
Yeah.
projects.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
I immediately, as you started, and I sort of had a sense that that was what it was, but I'd like to make sure our listeners know where your expertise lies and sort of the broad swimming pool in which you swim. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
I was reminded of the Joni Mitchell song, Let's Pave Paradise and Put Up a Parking Lot. And it sounds like what your direction is and the direction of the industry is to, if you're going to build a parking lot, make sure that you do it so that it sits in the proper natural setting. And maybe you wouldn't build a parking lot, but that's a whole different conversation, is dealing with, as you say, the infrastructure, which is sort of traditional construction, and keeping in mind what the impact on the natural setting is.
Yeah, the way that these projects are getting built and the way that they've evolved, the type of work that they've evolved into is really civil infrastructure construction. So that's why in the introduction you mentioned that I had to learn public works contracting. Well, a lot of the projects now require that type of skill or understanding to navigate that type of work. So you have companies that are traditional civil infrastructure construction companies now building ecological restoration projects. I sort of grew into it and came at it from the ecological side, but the skills now required include all the range of things you would imagine with a construction company that does traditional civil infrastructure. The key is now, instead of paving paradise, we're going, oh shoot, we paved it. That didn't work so well. Now we've got to move that parking lot, raise it, adjust it, change it, because we thought we could do those types of projects in a silo and ignore the climate and ignore natural systems. And now we're looking at the natural system and going, wait, we kind of need those to function too. Yeah. So we need to start looking at these things as one and the same. We have to figure out how to integrate our gray infrastructure with the systems we depend on for our survival.
Right. And boy, doesn't it make so much sense when you say that. And yet we haven't always, as a society, we haven't always tackled these things.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you need, I think I just want to throw in there that you need, so if you think about it, you need roads and bridges and things to move around vehicles and transport goods. But if the natural infrastructure that you depend on, like air and water and the landscape, can't produce the goods that you need because it's been diminished, then right. you go, oh, wait a second, this is all integrated. These things all have to exist together.
Super complex.
Mark and I live I live in flood and fire zones, and it's so apparent there that Mother Nature is often in charge. And if you're not working in tandem with Mother Nature when you're building things, those things are going to erode pretty quickly. And
she comes back to call on you, doesn't she?
She really does.
Mother Nature. Does. So, Mark, I'm going to ask you to think back when you were a young man, laborer in the construction industry. Did you imagine becoming a CEO? Was that your career path?
Never. Never. That was not on my track. My goal at the time was so I should caveat, I got my start. I did go to college, although I'm advocating for the fact that isn't necessary for a lot of folks who want to just simply go into the trades. Right. I did go to college. I had a degree in environmental science, and I thought that was the route I was going to need to take to work outdoors in a beautiful environment and, do things that I thought would help improve that environment. I quickly learned that I was not patient enough to be in an office doing, science, studying things, evaluating things, and not to, I in no way want to discredit the work that needs to be done there. This all has to happen together. But I felt like I needed to get out and be in the field. And I think part of the choice I made there is what affected my leadership down the road. And that was, I thought to myself, I need to sacrifice to learn and understand a different route to get into the type of work I want to do. And that meant taking at the time a dramatic pay cut. This was in my early 20s, completely changed my track and let someone else tell me what to do. So essentially I said, all right, And I actually didn't disclose to the folks that I took the job with, the construction company at the time, that I had the kind of science background, because I didn't want to be put in that position or being pegged as that's what this person does. So I took the job as an hourly laborer, and in my early 20s was handed a shovel and told to dig a trench from here to there. And I actually maintained that for a number of years, where I felt like I needed to, because I felt that the only way I was truly going to get an understanding of how the industry worked was to be in it deep and be directed, and not be put in this category of someone who couldn't or wouldn't, be humble enough to simply be told what to do and learn and understand from someone else's expertise that had been doing, physical labor, equipment operating, running construction projects for years. I really had to just really try to focus on, how do I do a really good job at taking direction? And I think that choosing that route, and again, doing it for a number of years, really affected and made me feel like, okay, now I understand how that part of the industry works. Now I can start thinking about how to make good decisions to actually be in the position of directing people.
Yeah, it sounds like I guess what we used to call apprenticeship, or right, like you didn't jump in at management, you worked your way up, understanding the nuts and bolts of the company, and or the industry, right, which is probably a better word. What really strikes me is that then you kind of know where the rubber meets the road. Like, you've been in those shoes when you direct somebody to do a project or to dig a trench and you hand someone else a shovel, right? That's an incredible gift to be able to empathize with your employees on that level.
Yeah, and I think part of it was to look at it, and even the idea of, I always felt like, as I was kind of traditionally moving up through the ranks, although I don't really see it that way either. I look at it as, if I could direct somebody, but if no one was going to do the work I was directing them to do, then I couldn't get the work done. Right. So it was more, I thought about how to represent it as more like there's sort of a hub and spokes, and each of the spokes has to function, or the whole thing doesn't function. So someone's got to make the decision and hold it together. But at the same time, if I have an equipment operator or laborer and I don't respect their position as equal to mine in terms of importance, then there was no way I was going to get the work done. So, but still someone needed to be in the position of making the decision. So I felt like if I understood how they perceive direction, and how those folks that do that type of work for a career, and there are careers in trade work, for the folks that do that work, which I saw myself as one of them for a while. If I understood how they receive direction and what made those folks tick, and how to get them to see themselves as a vested, interested party in the projects or whatever it is we were trying to accomplish, then I would get more out of everyone and have them feel like they were part of the team, and we would be successful. That worked really well. So going back to the introduction and I really did appreciate your discussion about the idea of continually having to reassure yourself that you're the right person to be in that position. That was the one thing I will say I struggled with, was because I didn't feel like I was came from the background of leadership. My family was very working class. I felt that I needed to reassure myself and remind myself that the experience I had was what gave me was why I earned the responsibility to be able to direct other people and delegate work. And I think that took a continual reassurance. I was very much working in a situation where I had folks that had mentored me over the years, but once I started moving into those leadership positions, I was very much able to sort of invent the process. And part of that was because the industry itself, the ecological restoration, civil construction industry, was growing at the same time I was working through my career. Right. So it's an emerging field, and there weren't folks that had done that type of work before.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting there trying to figure out both where do I fit in and where does the business I'm building fit in?
Right. Where is the industry going
Exactly. And in exchange, then I was looked at because I was out there kind of pushing the boundaries of that type of work, and building a clientele and all of that. Then those folks turned back and looked at me and said, "Oh, well, you are leading certain aspects of this. Oh my gosh, how did I get here? But I need to take this really, really seriously, because if you're kind of pushing a front forward, people are going to follow what you did or look at how you did, look at what you do and don't do, and judge it much more heavily than if you're following a convention that's been well established."
On that note, we're going to take a quick break so that I, Susan, can share an opportunity with you. I'm really excited to share that I'm offering a group coaching program starting this October. The Meant for More Mastermind is a 4-month virtual group coaching program for leaders and executives age 45 plus who want, well, more for themselves from their careers, their roles, their lives. A mastermind, in case you're not familiar, is a type of group coaching program which also emphasizes your connection to peers who know what it's like to be in your shoes. The Meant for More Mastermind creates a dedicated space and opportunity for you and your peers to get individualized support and coaching and to connect with each other so that you can all grow and take action and be more of who you want to be in this time in your life. Isn't it time to feel successful on your terms and to be in charge of your authentic leadership? So if you're a leader or executive who knows or suspects that you're meant for more than the role you currently have or than the way you show up in that role, this program is for you. You can read more about it at the link in the show notes or reach out to me directly for more information. Thanks for listening. Now back to our Secrets of the C-Suite episode in progress. So I just want to appreciate what you described as your path to a leadership position is also a really beautiful vision of leadership. The notion, and I'm not going to quote your words because I can't remember them, I just got this sort of sense for what you were saying, is that everybody on the team is an equal part of the success. And you can't be a good leader if no one's following you. And what you've described as both your growth journey into the CEO position, but also how you think about what you were doing and how you were leading is really a beautiful statement of leadership. So I just had to say that. You don't have to say anything else. But it's impressive to me to hear you articulate that. So let me pivot, unless Juliet, you want to say something?
No, go for it.
Okay. I couldn't tell, so I thought I'd check. What was the most surprising thing that you found when you became a CEO?
Well, one of the most interesting things to me was I thought as I became a CEO that what I was going to do was going to be pretty cut and dry. I mean, I've just explained how I evolved into that position, but I thought, oh, well, I'm in this leadership role. I can turn around to all the folks around me and ask, folks that the company was growing at the same time. So of course we were outsourcing things like our accountant or whatever. And I turned to other folks and would say, well, what do I do here? And they're like, well, there's a whole host of things you can do here. Oh, okay. So I would listen to what the input, I would really carefully listen to inputs, but I also realized that the inputs meant that there wasn't necessarily, and again, with the emerging industry, there wasn't the standards, but there are standards around civil construction. Right. But I was listening to inputs, and I was also looking around at other companies and trying to network with people in similar positions. And the range of choices and the range of which people manage is enormous. And I actually felt a lot of times like I would listen to certain things and then I'd say, I don't like any of those things.
I love that.
But so I don't like any of these choices. This is not, I don't feel good about any of this. And then I say, okay, well, but if I'm not going to do all of these things that are, like being put in front of me, and not that it was an exhaustive list. I mean, you also have time crunches and you're dealing with things like, human resource flare-ups, which was a significant distraction we could talk about. But anyway, but if I decided I was going to do something that wasn't in the host of options that I had seen, then I would think, well, okay, now it just got that much more complicated because now I have to figure out a basis for whatever decision I had to make.
Yep.
And I think that piece of it was probably the hardest part, because I always felt like if I didn't have some basis in a decision, because the last thing I wanted to ever do was make a decision based on my ego or recognition or how I would look in the end. Yeah. For me, it was always, if I don't make the right decision here for the people that worked for me, then this whole thing is not going to work. And so it was sort of this balancing act between, and again, going back to like, yes, this was a piece that I had never really planned for or understood. But then again, ending up as a CEO, as we started with, was not something I ever really planned for. So looking at it in terms of like making good decisions and setting your instinct aside for a minute, because I felt like I had to set that aside, no matter how strongly I felt, to make sure that my instinct was had some basis in fact, and that there was the inputs that were determining what I was going to do were solid and something I could turn back to if anybody ever questioned my decision.
I think one of the most impressive parts of working for you, Mark, and working with you was the access that I want to say aloud because that's a strange word, but the access that the people who worked for you had to you. So you knew almost everyone in the company. You went out in the field. They knew who you were by face, and by reputation as well. And that, I believe, really brought a lot of respect to your role from the people that worked in the organization and from all levels of the organization. It was a really fun time because the company was growing so rapidly and there was so much to do, and it was all hands on deck, and everybody was in, and it was a very cool time. Pretty cool
rare
time.
That everybody is in. This might be a good time for us to pivot to my secret agenda for this podcast, which is a little bit of discussion and dissection of the working relationship that you two had. So, Mark, you were the CEO. You hired Juliet as the CFO, and that position hadn't existed. So I'm really curious, what was it that you saw in your environment that you said to yourself, this company needs a CFO, and you created a job description? So what was going on in the company that made you look at that and make that decision?
I think when I think back on that decision or the process that the company went through to get to that point, I think that there's things that you can work with partners, independent consultants or contractors on. Right. And that really revolves around a lot of the sort of nuts and bolts of like business operation. But the challenge of especially a growing company is that when it comes to planning and forecasting and thinking about the next steps, someone who is, and this is what Juliet and I think we really clicked on, is that I'll never forget, we first got together and started talking about planning and budgeting, and she said, "I love budgets," and I'm like, "Oh my God, I love budgets." And I was like, "This is not a conversation. This is not a common conversation out there, but we thought we need to get a handle on this and look forward as to how to budget and plan, but to be able to budget and plan in a way that matches sort of the track of a business. I felt like I needed a thought partner. I also felt like it was really important that person had a vested interest in the company and like at the core, because again, there's all this information out there and a lot of inputs coming at you, but the decision on the ultimate direction of the company is affected by its finances to the core. Yeah. And so I felt that it was so important, even though essentially we stepped over some of the more fundamental accounting positions. I felt that it was important that I had someone that looked forward the same way I did or thought about things the same way I did, or at least when I say really, it was the same way that the company did and the way everyone in the company was thinking about the work they were doing, and then work to backfill the positions to shore that up to make sure that the decisions could be implemented accordingly. Plus, I knew I needed somebody who had a little more accounting and finance background than I did, because again, I taught myself accounting, which is not someone you want to, have as a company grows, you need to have someone with some experience there. And that kind of
teaching yourself accounting is better than not teaching yourself accounting and making accounting decisions, right?
So that is very true.
Very true.
Let's agree on that.
I love accounting. Again, strange. I love accounting. It's strange coming from my background, right? I should say. I mean, I didn't go into it from the start, but I actually loved the fact that things in accounting, you get to a point where things are actually quite clear and sort of determined for you.
There's a right answer. Awesome. That's why I love it.
It makes complete
there's
sense.
An answer.
It makes complete sense to me, Mark. You're a scientist, right? So it's data.
You're always looking for answers. Yeah, you're looking for like a hard and fast, like this is the action, this is the answer, right? And with so many other inputs, like I said, coming in with no answers or having to just sort of think things from like, oh, this can actually, I can like hone in on something here and get an answer, which was.
Yeah, I think that for me, it was the most interesting part of being the first time CFO, because this was the first time I was a first time CFO, was that I won't say often, but regularly did have to say to Mark, no, I do that. That's how you hired me. And it wasn't a pain point. It was just a reminder of like, no, you go do that thing that you do really well and you're client facing, and I'm just going to make sure everything's working in the background. So that was pretty cool. I do want to, we have a little bit more time, but I do want to just ask a couple questions, because when Mark and I were working together, we went through the pandemic together, which was a very interesting time and quite a pivot for the organization. And we came through that very successfully. And I also, during that time, there was a lot of talk about DEI initiatives. And we had an employee come to us and say, what are we going to do here? We need to do something. And so we started to build the DEI within the company. And I just wanted to get Mark's take on that and philosophy, because we are tying that into our conversations just about how important that is within a company. And I just wanted to hear Mark's point of view on that.
Well, that's a great topic, because that was probably, from my perspective, that was a really challenging thing to bring to a civil construction environment, because unfortunately, as everyone can just assume or people know from experience, the construction industry tends to lag when it comes to progressive concepts, and at least things that are progressive relative to the industry. So in this case, there was a balancing act, because one of the things about the company was there was a lot of folks from the traditional civil construction world. And the challenge with it was actually figuring out how to communicate that it's a good thing. And that really was about, and I think, and I so appreciated, Julia, I so appreciated your kind of bringing that to my attention, pushing it forward. And I thought there's no reason that a civil construction company or a traditional construction company can't adopt these concepts just because it's not being done everywhere. Doesn't mean that in the construction industry it can't be adopted. It's just about learning how to communicate it across the board so that folks buy into what they're learning. And I think, so the approach we took was really focusing on how the benefits of DEI applied to day-to-day work that was being done by crews in the field on construction sites. And I think the most incredible thing that I saw really click with folks was the idea of diversity of thought and diversity of backgrounds. And the fact that when you talk about diversity, people's lived experiences bring perspectives that you would never otherwise get.
Right.
And that was the way I think we really were able to drive it home to a lot of folks who might have been more skeptical about other aspects of that type of program, was the idea that, hey, more ideas are sometimes really, really important. And especially if you're sitting, a good example is if you got a construction crew working on a site, a lot of times they run into things that were unexpected, challenging, whatever. and the lived experiences of people standing there trying to decide what to do, sometimes in a big hurry, bring an incredible value to the decision making that happens in the field, because they've been out there doing these things. So someone might come from some background or some culture where they've done it differently, and if they bring that to the table, then the decision might be that much more enhanced. The outcome would be enhanced. So
I agree. Yeah. No, I mean, the innovation that happened in real time in the building of the jobs that you all were building was really impressive, and just, one of the exciting parts definitely of working with you and with the company. I have two questions, and I think that's going to close us out. The first one is, I want you to just talk a little bit about the EWI, the Ecological Workforce Initiative, and how you got that started. And then I also wanted to have you talk a little bit about what you're doing now related to kind of your learnings and leading the industry for those many years.
Well, that's a great two-part question, because the answer is basically one and the same. So, and I addressed it a little bit earlier when I talked about looking at the work as a hub with spokes and a wheel. So the Ecological Workforce Initiative was born out of this experience, or the experience I had where I was working on construction projects doing ecological restoration work, and the community folks that kind of that pay attention to that, are involved in the community of people doing restoration work, did not see the trade workers, and this was a repeated experience, as part of the team building an ecological restoration project. They would think of them as, they're just with the contractor when these projects need to get built. So the idea of bringing them to the table, bringing the trade workers to the table to be participants in the process, addressed the end of these projects when they are ready for construction, which I saw a lot of struggles with that, because there was a lack of communication, a lack of ability to translate the science to the trade workers building the projects. And so it was about communication. And so the Ecological Workforce Initiative is focusing on solving for that and making sure people doing trade work on these projects are brought into the tent. On the other side of it, the business that I started after leaving the company, the construction company, was focused on taking that same lived experience of the contractor perspective. Now, again, the contractor is not the trade workers. The contractor is the business, that the owner of the business or the participant in the business that holds the contracting license. And so the contracting piece was, I experienced that and saw a lot of things that were planned and assumed related to planning for a construction of an ecological project, but had never been vetted with anyone that actually build the project. So there's a lot of folks in the science side guessing about how a project would be built without talking to anybody who'd ever built them. And sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. So I don't want to write off the level of effort that it takes to get one of these types of projects on the ground. But a lot of that disconnect there also was about communication. And so what I'm focused on now is bringing the experiences as a contractor, working between the trade workers and designers, back to the folks that are planning these types of projects, and explaining to them and working on things like budgeting and planning for constructability very, very early on, so that when the project gets to a contractor, the project's buildable.
Yeah. Wow.
And that company is called Outset Advisors.
Yes, that's correct.
And I think it's great. And I think when we worked together, I know that those were the things that caused a lot of delays at the beginning of a project. We would be awarded a project. You'd think you were going to start in May, and then they realized that the folks had not taken things into account, did not have the right permits, all those things. So there's a lot of complexity there. And I think that's great.
So on that note, I do think it's time for us to wrap. Mark, it has been delightful to have you on today. Really appreciate you sharing with us your experience and your leadership perspective. For our listeners, thank you for being with us for yet another episode of Secrets of the C-Suite, the podcast. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode, so please listen along. Thank you. We're so glad you've joined us for this episode of Secrets of the C-Suite, the podcast. We'll be back with another episode in 2 weeks. In the meantime, please tell your friends and coworkers about us, and be sure to follow, subscribe, and give us a 5-star rating if you enjoyed listening. Secrets of the C-Suite is produced by Juliet Clothier, Susan Sutherland, and Brian Clothier. Original music is by Brian Clothier, and the podcast is inspired by leaders like you.